Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. Strong words from Horace Mann for mankind. In tonight's episode, Professor Fowler is going to be visited by some very special guests. Ghosts from the not-too-distant past. Specters who are going to provide him with some much-needed perspective on the impact that he's had on others along his journey of life. By the end of tonight's tale, I hope we all realize that one need not be a teacher to instruct, nor hold advanced degrees to confer knowledge. It's a responsibility that we all must share. The good news? There's plenty of room here in the Twilight Tube Zone.
The Changing of the Guard situates itself in the third season of the classic Twilight Zone series, episode number 37. It's directed by Robert Ellis Miller and written by the man, the myth, the legend himself. You know who it is. It's Rod Serling. Now, most of the time when we think of the classic Twilight Zone series, we tend to refer back to, spooky characters or classic plot twists. But there are a few episodes that actually deal with just the beauty and wonder of life. The Changing of the Guard is one of those episodes that really hits home about what it means to be a human being. And I find it to be one of the most, if not the most, inspirational Twilight Zone episode of all. Now, just some interesting facts behind this episode. Serling himself was, in fact, a teacher. In fact, upon completion of the Changing of the Guard script, he actually took a position teaching writing at his old alma mater, Antioch College. And who was the first president of Antioch College? Horace Mann. So there's your Mann connection. Horace Mann was the gentleman who gave us the quote that I mentioned in my introduction of this episode, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." From what we know of the history, Serling very much valued teaching. He actually took another teaching position at Ithaca College in upstate New York from 1967 until the year that he passed in 1975. So, what did Serling teach at Ithaca College? Well, a little course called creativity. Yeah, I think he was more than qualified to teach that class. Ithaca College still has 150 of the original Twilight Zone scripts, and they display Serling's Emmys from his writing days. Pretty cool stuff. The Changing of the Guard is a story about a man named Ellis Fowler, a teacher at the Rock Spring School for Boys. Fowler is played by actor Donald Pleasance, who is probably more well known as being Dr. Samuel Loomis, the psychiatrist who tries to help Michael Myers in the Halloween franchise. Yeah, that's him. Pleasance's work here in this episode of The Twilight Zone is nothing short of phenomenal. He absolutely hits right at the core of humanity and inspires us to want to be better human beings and to change the world around us. Professor Fowler loves teaching and he loves his students. He enjoys introducing them to authors of great poetry, writers who can express the human experience almost like a song. Fowler has been doing this actually for more than a few decades. He even taught the grandfather of one of his current students. That's a pretty long legacy there, quite honestly. However, all of this is about to change. The headmaster of the school calls Fowler into his office to let him know that they won't be renewing his contract for the next year. Fowler begins to see his life's work as a complete failure. After all, there is no tangible item, right? A widget that he can point to and say, see that? I made that. He can't do that. And with nothing there in front of him, thoughts of suicide start to creep into his mind. Fowler takes a gun from his desk and walks over to the school to the statue of Horace Mann, where it says that, quote, again, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." And as Fowler stands in the cold, dark snow, he reads that quote and he just says, "I am ashamed." And that's when the Twilight Zone steps in, just in time. He begins to hear the school bells ring, which is really odd, of course, because it's in the middle of the night. And that draws him back to his classroom for what he thinks is probably his last time. All of a sudden, as he's staring across this empty class, students start to magically appear in the seats. He blinks his eyes and he tries to focus in and see them, and he finally realizes, wait a second, these were my students, but they had all passed away. Now, Fowler looks at these apparitions of his students, and he begins to apologize to them, lamenting that he's given them nothing but frivolous poems and ideas. And the students look at him, and they say, that's not true. You see, the students begin to tell Fowler, one at a time, that his words and the words of those great authors and poets were with them when they needed those thoughts the most, in times of battle and in times of horribly chaotic moments, in times of great scientific discovery. And each person that these young men saved can also be attributed to the work that Professor Fowler did in encouraging them to be courageous in these moments. The students have essentially become the teacher, and Professor Fowler can now go home, content with retirement, having known that he has indeed won some victories for humanity. This episode immediately brings to mind Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, and the idea that the reach of any one individual is incredibly difficult to quantify without some kind of divine or supernatural assistance. Nonetheless, it isn't, and it shouldn't be, too difficult for us to believe that a single human being can have such an impact on others, and that you yourself can have such an impact on the people around you. I meant what I said at the beginning of this episode. We are all of us teachers in this great world, from young to old. The only question is, what would you like to convey to the world? For my Silver Linings lesson here, I'd like to talk about a poem that I've taught probably 100 times before, and it's likely one that you've heard at least a portion of, and it actually even makes an appearance in this episode, and that is John Donne's No Man is an Island. It's a fairly short poem, so let me just read it to you here first. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Whenever I do get the chance to teach this poem, I'm always amazed at how many students either, come into this with a misreading, the idea being that it's kind of a horror poem, right? Seek not to know for whom the bell tolls. That's not what it's about, though, at all. It's almost the total opposite of being a horror poem. It's a poem about life. The point of the poem is that anytime any one of us dies as human beings, we have lost essentially a part of ourselves because we're all connected by the species of humanity. Whether it's a person we love, a person we know as friends, someone we barely know, or even someone we've never met. When we hear that someone has passed away from those around us, we shouldn't just say that we're sorry to them. We should take a minute to reflect on the fact that we should be actually a little bit sorry for real, because we've lost the chance at making another connection with another human being. Now, I'm most definitely not saying that we need to walk around in a constant state of mourning, right? Because that would be incredibly unhealthy. But what I am saying is, when someone tells you of the passing of an individual, or you hear of the passing of an individual, right? Even if you've never met that person, we often say, to be polite, I'm sorry to hear for your loss. What John Donne is saying is, you also need to be a bit sorry for your own loss, in that we've lost someone as a part of the collective species of humanity. So, why might you consider this the next time you hear about the passing of someone you've never even met? Well, because you're not just simply giving dignity back to the deceased, you're also extending dignity to those of us who are alive, to the human condition.